Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock. I'd like to call the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting to order. And first here, I'd like to recognize that we acknowledge that we are conducting this meeting on the unceded traditional territories of the Shuswap Huipachesset First Nations, and we're grateful for the opportunity to do so. We also have directors calling in from other territories, and I would also like to acknowledge those nations and express our gratitude and our respect. Notice to attendees and delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube on the Regional District website. If anybody is watching online and you have questions or comments, please email them to responses@acrd.bc.ca, and we'll look at those at the end of the meeting. Next we have, we'll do introductions. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, and we'll go to Zoom. So my name is Debbie Haggard. I am a city councillor and the appointed representative to the ACRD board and vice chair of the board and chair of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee. So we'll go this way today.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Saillant. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the ACRD.
Good morning. I'm Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning. Akama Penikote. I am the Sprout Lake Electoral Area Director.
And good morning. I'm Mike Sparrow. I'm the Cherry Creek Electoral Director.
Good morning, everyone. Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Good morning. Cynthia Dick, General Manager of Administrative Services.
Thank you. So now we'll go online and I'll just go in the order that I see you. First of all, Director Roth.
Good morning. I'm Susan Roth for Beaver Creek.
Thank you. Director Beckett.
Good morning, Bob Beckett, Director, Area A, Bamfield.
Thank you. Director Jack.
Oklahoma Sayachat, Ishtukshitla Hoyt. My name is John Jack, Director for Hoyt. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Coots.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mariah Coots. I'm the representative for the Hotchkiss Tribe Government. Klakochu.
Thank you, Director Minions.
Shari Minions, Mayor for the City of Port Alberni.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Fred Boyko, Director, Beaufort. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paula, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Paula Weichelberger, Solid Waste Manager with the ACRD.
Thank you, everyone. Don't think I missed anyone. Next, we have to approve the agenda. Is there any additions from directors? Seeing none, is there any additions from the corporate officer?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Director Cote, seconded by Director Sparrow. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Any declarations or conflict of interest? Seeing none, we have minutes from the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee meeting held on September 25th, 2024. Is any errors or omissions? Seeing none, could I get a motion that the minutes of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee meeting held on September 25th, 2024 be adopted? Moved by Director Sparrow, seconded by Director Cote. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. No petitions, delegations, or presentations today. No correspondence for action or information. And first is request for decision. And we have one item on this report is the Alberni Valley Aquatic Center governance, our third discussion on this matter. And Terry Fong is going to be taking the lead on this discussion. Please go ahead, Terry.
Great. Thank you. Sorry, just got to get set up here. Okay, so today we are going to continue our discussion regarding the proposed Alberni Valley Aquatic Center service. I apologize for being away at the end of September and the delay for this excellent conversation, but we'll kind of pick up where we were. I think we last met on this topic actually in August. So just a reminder of the goal. So our goal is to conduct a referendum in the Alberni Valley to determine if the public supports the construction of a new aquatic center. We have made numerous decisions to date, including who the service participants are. So those at this time are City of Port Alberni, Uchuckwusit Tribe Government, electoral areas, Beaufort, Sprout Lake, Beaver Creek, and Cherry Creek. We've also discussed and made a decision regarding the participating area approval, and that the referendum, it'll be decided by referendum, with approval being required separately in each of these participating areas. We defined the service as the development and operation of an aquatic center only. In terms of voting, the voting on administrative and operations of the service will be using an alternative voting model of 1 vote per participating area director. And we did start discussing cost recovery, and one of the things we did discuss was that user fees and other revenue sources will definitely be mechanisms for funding the service, but we won't set like entrance fees or program fees until the service is established. So today's discussion continues on, and we're going to be discussing what reliance on grant funding we would like to have, as well as the cost recovery methods of taxation and apportionment. So really the meat and potatoes of the discussion, I would say. In order to provide you estimates and some breakdowns that were based on some actual costs, we did make some facility construction cost estimates. So the feasibility study that was finished in early 2024 talked about an estimated construction cost of 68 million. This was a Class D estimate, which is between plus or minus 25%. Some people would say Class D estimates are more like plus or minus 40%, but we'll stick with the 25 for now. In the report itself, they recommended that if we were looking to build in 2026, that we should apply a 5 to 6% inflation factor to each of the years leading up to that. So we as staff have come up with a estimated total facility cost of $100 million. Is that number shocking? Yes. Is that number potentially reality? Also, yes. There is facilities that have been being built right now that are definitely in this range. Like current costs are about $70 million for the one that's in Campbell River. I think the one in North Van, which is pretty fancy, but still a newer pool with a lot of these amenities, I think came in at about $110 million. So I think if we're looking at a estimated start time of 2027, that we do have to be ready for this reality. So these are the numbers that are based on all the discussions moving forward today. However, we can talk about these estimates as well. So one of the parts that we really need to decide if we're going to go make this a service establishing bylaw and a loan authorization bylaw to take to the public for referendum is, are we going to build a reliance on grant funding into our assumptions? Like, are we not going to proceed unless we get a certain percentage of grant funding? So in our loan authorization bylaw that will need to go with our establishing bylaw, we need to put in a maximum borrowing amount that can be included. These borrowing bylaws will expire from 5 years from the date of adoption if construction has not started. So the risk of setting a grant target that is too high that we can't achieve is that the whole referendum process and the borrowing in there, if we haven't been able to get those grants in 5 years, will basically have to be repeated because we lose that authority in 5 years. So it will, grant funding on the flip side will obviously lower costs per household. And as I mentioned, sorry, if it's not achieved within the time frame, then a new referendum is required. Just to give you some context, with the multi-use path on the West Coast, it took us just over 5 years to secure the grant funding, and I think it was about 7 between project identification and actually building. However, most of that project, like 90% of that project, was grant funded. So it's always hard. The higher the target for grant funding, the harder the grant funding is to find. Absolutely. So I'm just going to talk about, oh, no, apparently I'm not going to click anything. Oh, there we go. So I did base all of the borrowing estimates on a 30-year term using the MFA rate as posted on their website when I developed this, which is at 3.73%. And in terms of grant funding, I just wanted to give you 3 kind of options. If we borrowed 100 million over 30 years, our annual debt servicing cost would be about 5.6 million. if we aimed for a target of 25% funding, or say that the maximum build cost could be 75 million, then our annual debt servicing costs will be about 4.2 million. And if we aimed for 50% grant funding or a $50 million facility, we'd be at about 2.8 million of annual debt servicing costs. So happy to discuss grant reliance at this point if the directors so wish.
Director Cote?
Thank you. Trying to put this into a little bit of a perspective. Well, we built the hospital. What was the cost on that? I'm just trying to do a comparison. And what was our annual expense? Can we sort of look at that as?
I don't know those numbers off the top of the head. Most of that debt was on the board, on the books before I got here. I can definitely look into what that was. We only pay 40% of the borrowing of the hospital, so that would only have been our component of it. But I can find that information for sure.
Director Sparrow?
Thank you for that. So if we go, say, 25% grant funding and the cost escalates, we can put more grant funding towards it. But what happens if we don't get 25% grant funding and the cost escalates? How do we accommodate for that in the borrowing aspects?
So if the directors were to want to proceed with the facility, but we were not getting the grant funding and we're wanting to go, then I think there could be a discussion. Obviously I haven't, we don't have anything more than a Class D estimate, so we don't have a lot to go off of, but we could scale the facility at that point and maybe leave out some amenities and say, like, if you picked the $75 million as the max that we want to borrow, and you're counting on 25% grant funding, but we don't get that grant funding, we do have the ability to build the facility up to 75 million. So the borrowing limit is non-negotiable. You can't go above that. And once you set that with the public, that is the max. But if you are to end up getting more, like say the facility came in even higher, if we can find that in grant funding, then we're still within our authority to proceed. But I think my concept would be, and I'm not a pool expert, so this would definitely need to be done in conjunctions with whoever's designing this for us, would be that we would be leaving out some of the amenities to make the pool fit within the budget.
Thank you, Terry. Director Roth?
Thank you. I would like to know how many tax-paying households there are in each of the participating areas. It's kind of a number that works well for me. And this is all too big a numbers for me too.
We might, I'm just trying to think. I know I have folios and I can't remember if we end up with folios by property class. One second. So I've done it here in terms of like the service area wide. There's like a 11,668.
What about, is there something that breaks it down further?
So this one I have in that column B, there's parcels by area, but that's not broken down by property class. But I definitely can get that information.
That'd be great, because I find myself needing it for other things too. So that'd be really excellent. Thank you.
Daniel, please go ahead.
So it may be useful just with the question around the comparison to the hospital costs and the number of folios. When we did the survey around the pool, all of those details are actually built into the survey, and that then broke it down to an annual cost per average household. And so perhaps, Terry, what we can do is we can come back with those details, because it's one thing to take a look at how many households, another to take a look at how much we spend on hospital. But what's really useful is understanding the cost per household within your area. And of course, this is where, when later on today, when we get into the formula, this is really where I think the rubber hits the road in terms of how much an average house would be paying in order to carry whatever cost is associated. And it makes for an easier comparison between regional areas and between the regional area and municipalities as well, because you can break it down to a per household cost.
Director Roth, if you're just looking for the population, you could probably get that on StatsCan website.
No, I'm not just looking for that. Thanks.
Director Cote?
Thank you. In a conversation I've had with Ms. Fong, doesn't matter how it's broken down unless it's parcel tax. Percentage wise, in the end, when the regional district sends out the tax bill, it goes to assessment based. Am I correct?
Are we wanting to jump ahead into the tax discussion, or are we gonna?
Yeah, you're ahead of it.
We can, because I feel like that's where we're going, and I can go through all of my slides. If we don't want to just focus on grant funding, I'm happy to do that.
I think we just do it one step at a time.
Okay.
Yeah, and save the questions when it's relevant. Please go ahead.
So just to clarify, when there's information coming forward that the average cost per household is this, that's not how it ends up when the taxation bill comes out. So that's just what I'm trying to clarify. It is an average, but that's not what taxation bill comes out to different houses. So.
Well, correct. I mean, some will be lower, some will be higher. So and that's what the average is going to be when it's tied to both population and assessment. That formula is going to give us a range, and that's part of the discussion we want to have today, is looking at that formula. We use that average household just because it means that some people will be lower, some will be higher, but on average, it gives at least a ballpark number that people can look at. And we always indicate, when we talk about average, we identify the assessed value of that average house too, so people can get a good idea of, based on that assessment and their own assessment, where they'd roughly sit on whether they're above or below average.
Dr. Sparrow?
Thank you for that. So when I look at this, it says estimated annual borrowing operating costs is what you use for your chart at the very beginning here for the costing. But up there, that is only for the borrowing cost. So even if you get 20% grant funding, the numbers here won't go down by 25%, but probably go down by about 15%, because you have a $2 million operating budget per year put into the costing of. So when people look at these charts and they realize, well, if we get 0.5% grant funding, that number will drop in half. It won't. It'll drop down by about 35% and 30%, because the operating costs don't change. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we will not find operating grants on the regular. Maybe if we have a new program or something, we would find it, but we do not find. So we are solely talking about the capital borrowing costs and what grant reliance we want to do on the construction. And then we can talk about operating costs after that. But at this point, we're talking just about what is the plan with the construction costs and how much grant reliance are we going to have to build this facility, or to I shouldn't say build, to propose the facility to the public.
Any more questions before Terry moves on? Seeing none, please go ahead, Terry.
Okay. In terms of feasibility, or the feasibility study and operating costs, they do estimate in the study between $1.8 and $2 million. I have estimated the offsetting revenues to be about $200,000. That is approximately what the city is receiving at this point. I feel like it's realistic, especially for a new facility that will hopefully be a bit of a draw. So I have estimated all these tables that are about to come at you based on a $2 million per year operating cost. So in my discussion, because I wasn't sure the direction from the committee regarding grant funding, I have built everything off of an annual cost of $7.6 million. So that is no grant funding on the construction of the facility, and then a $2 million operating cost. So today we have discussed taxation and apportionment a couple of times now, and have got some feedback, and was asked to come back with a couple of hybrid options. So today we are presenting 5 different options. The first one being converted land and improvements while using the tax base of land and improvements. So there's kind of the two things. There's the apportionment, which is how we divide the pie between the different areas, but then there's the how does the tax actually reach the homeowner or property owner. So in this case, the first option is our traditional model of converted land and improvements. The second model that we'll move on to discuss is 50% land and improvements, 50% population as your apportionment. But then you go back to property value as your taxation method. Third option was to reduce that population component a little bit and do 30%. Oops, I might have wrote that one wrong. I think it was the other way around. I think it's 30% population, 70% land improvements. I'll have to fix that when I go down further. Sorry about that. The next one is to do solely on parcel tax. And the final option we will discuss today is the construction costs and borrowing costs to be done by parcel, and then the annual operating costs to be done by converted land and improvements. So for each of these five options, we have provided apportionment by participating area, an estimated household cost based on the average assessed value for each area, the allocation of costs based on BC assessment class or number of parcels in each of the participating areas, and a summary of those costs by assessment class. So a lot of tables, a lot of information, and I think I will go through all of it before we pause, and then we can definitely jump back and forth because, as I said, there's a lot. So the first one is that traditional method that we do use for most of our services here at the regional district and across the province. It is based on the converted land and improvement formula, and does show you a range of average estimated household cost. So if you see the range of average household assessed value, it ranges between about 500,000 to 900,000. And as a result, the estimated household cost also ranges. And in that case, it ranges from about $430 for the average household to $748. In terms of how that goes by property class, so if this model were to be used, 5.8 million of the 7.6 would be paid by the residential sector or the residential class of in BC assessment. And then you can see the different areas. So business and others would pay just shy of $1 million of those annual operating costs. There was previous discussions with the directors that indicated that this option is not supported as it does not recognize the range of property values in the participating areas. And I guess I should clarify that's residential property values. So option 2 is to look at a hybrid of 50% population and 50% land and improvements. This is using the Stats Canada statistics that are provided for our area. We did not exclude the residents that are living on the Sashot and Hoopachesset Reserve lands in this calculation. Those could form the basis of maybe some service discussions with the nations at a later date. The challenge with this model is that as a regional district, we do not have the taxing authority on people. So even though we're going to divide the pie, let's say, or split it up by area using that population method, when it comes down to people getting their tax bill, they're still getting it solely based on their value of land and improvements and their assessed value. This model has been used by our regional district. It is a model that is used for the West Coast Transit Service, which is Tofino, Ucluelet, Long Beach, Uthuathat, and Toquat are all part of that service. And so this is a method of apportionment that we have used before. In terms of how it impacts the average household, so the range becomes smaller when you add that population factor because the area of Sprout Lake that tends to have the higher assessed values tends to have the lower population. So in this case, the range goes from about $450 to about $500. So the average household, again, based on solely the average household, they do tend to be a bit more even under this model. In terms of how this allocates based on the different property classes, again, there's actually a slight more share from the business community in this model and a little bit less in the residential share. The one problem with this is these Stats Canada statistics are only updated once every 5 years. I shouldn't say it's a problem. It's just something to note that it's not really something that changes every year, even though growth obviously occurs every year. And that one more warning of that local governments have no ability to tax people, and therefore once apportioned between participating areas, the taxes are paid by property owners based on value of land and improvements. So option 3, as I mentioned, I did have it backwards in that earlier slide. It is a method of doing 30% population and 70% land and improvements. So same concept as the one before, with just slightly different ratios. This is actually the one that staff is recommending. It does move us away slightly from that traditional land and improvement model, but doesn't go as far as the 50%. Again, you have to remember that these are snapshots in time. So as growth occurs in one area, whether that's population growth or assessed value growth, these numbers will continue to change. And this one does actually show a slightly larger because there's more reliance on that land and improvement. So it is a bigger variance from the earlier 50-50 option. So in this situation, it ranges from about $460 to $600. So slightly more of a range in average estimated cost. Again, the requisition by class actually ends up being fairly similar. I wouldn't say it's really anything that's worth talking about between those two because the amounts are small. Then we move on to a totally different model as we've moved away from the value of the land and just talked about parcels by area. So in total, counting all the property classes, there's about 12,800 parcels. And in this case, everyone, no matter your property class or your size or the assessed value, pays the same thing. So everyone would pay just shy of $600. So that means your big commercial entity pays the same as your small family house. In this case, the share that will be paid by the residential property class is significantly higher. It goes up to about 90% or 6.9 million of the 7.6 million. So quite a bit higher. There is a perception, like the property tax model definitely has its faults, but there is a perceived fairness of it. And this is considered to be perceived unfair as no consideration of property value or ability to pay. I will also note that there is increased administrative costs to create and maintain the parcel tax rolls. So it'd be a big project from both city staff and regional district staff in the initial year, but there's also every year advertising requirements, letter requirements, and process requirements to maintain a parcel tax roll, just to note. The fifth and final option that we have presented is a hybrid. So this is using the debt borrowing costs by parcel tax and the operations by land and improvement. So we could change that where it's like a 50-50. It doesn't necessarily need to be that the construction and borrowing costs are completely done by parcel, but this was a request at the last meeting, so we have provided it. In terms of the range, the range is quite high, because so the range goes from about 550 to 633. And then in terms of the by property class, it's actually so 73% of the total taxation would be done by parcel because the bulk of our costs are going to be by the borrowing. And then 87% would be paid by the residential component or property class. And that an increased administrative costs to maintain the parcel tax rules would still exist no matter how small or how small the dollar value is of that parcel. So this is the summary of the options by requisition by area, just to show the different ones. I've also provided it in terms of estimated household cost. I'm wondering which one might be best if to leave one up so that we know what we're talking about as we start asking questions. So I'll maybe leave it with this one at this time, and then we can definitely, if you have questions about an individual method, we can definitely jump into that. And I think I'll leave it there if that's okay, Director Haggard.
Questions or comments? Director Sparrow.
Thank you for that. When looking through all these different charts, and thank you for the presentation, that was long and detailed. I looked through all these charts and thinking, well, what's going to bring the costing down per household on an average basis? All we can do, because everybody says it's too expensive. So the only way to really think about this is what is the lowest cost of the highest end? Does that make sense? So when I look at all this, the only chart that has the lowest high cost is option 2, which is 588. Anything above that has a higher cost somewhere in the mix. And then if any one area backs out, we lose. So the only way to try and get any sort of consensus is to get the lowest, highest cost and drive that down to a point where we have a chance of this working. Because I don't really think people want to pay $750 a year. But they might want to pay $500 a year if we can push it down through grant funding. So on that basis, looking what I'm looking at, I think the best option looking forward is option 2, but I'm willing to listen to everybody else if they thoughts on that.
Thank you, Director Cote.
Thank you. So I keep looking at this and thinking, what would it cost for not the average person, household at Sprout Lake? There's such a range of assessments that all of the lake houses will be paying much more than 592 or whatever. Yeah, these are averages. They're not the actual range. So I would really like to know what the range is so that I can actually be looking at actual numbers rather than an average number. Because the only way I'd like to move forward is by parcel tax, because that's the only one that I know that's constant. And I know that that's not the favor of this board because of industry not being hit up the way that they should be. And when you have multiple parcels, you know, I would argue that if you have that much land, you're in the same position as what Sprout Lake is. So with assessment based. So I'd really like to know more about the range. So that's my position.
Thank you, Director Cote. Terry, I have a question. Are these re-looked at every year according to assessment value? Because those assessments will change every year.
Yes, so the requisition is definitely determined every year. And we do provide like the average residential assessed value. We do provide those in our financial plan package and show what those have changed by and then what the impact of those changes are. But yes, that number, so your assessed value is going to change every year. Your census or population statistics will only change with the actual census. So that factor would stay the same for 5 years and then change once we get the new data released. In terms of Director Cote's question about range, like, sure, we can provide tax rate and you can just go and figure out which you want, but like, I'm not sure how, like, you're wanting me to get BC assessment to remove the anomalies. Like basically that is the average assessed value in your area. I think it's about 900,000. So if they're worth 2 million, I would just recommend they multiply it because it's hard to provide it unless you do it on the roll. And in that case, I could just provide you what the tax rates are for each of these and we could go from there because I'm not sure what information I could provide you that's valuable that's not the entire roll, if that makes sense.
I agreed. I know it's a wide and a monstrous job to be looking at individual costs per household rather than an average, but the average just doesn't, it's not the full story as to what the costs actually are per household. So when I go to, or my neighbor goes to to a referendum that says, okay, this is what your cost is gonna be. It's gonna be an average of $633. It's not going to be.
It would be illustrated as a tax rate. So tax rates are like 0.5507 per thousand of assessed value, which lots of people find incredibly confusing, which is why we try to use an average estimated household, because we actually find that in conversation with the public, they actually find that easier to be like, okay, well, a 600,000 would be this, so I'll be about 1.5 times that. But when it comes down to the question and like the legal advertising that would be in it, it would definitely be as a tax rate, and that we would still be providing these other examples for them as context. But yeah, tax rates are very misleading as well because of the different assessed values and the total assessed value of an area. So all of it has a component of being helpful and unhelpful. I completely agree.
Daniel, please go ahead.
Yeah, Terry's answered one aspect. I just wanted to answer the question, or maybe the comment from Director Sparrow. If we go back to the survey work that we did, the sweet spot is in the neighborhood between the 400 and 500. When I say sweet spot, it's if we're going to referendum, and if it's the referendum is about trying to get this done and finding an area where the majority of the communities with an S would be in favor, that 400 to 500 per household, I think there was about 70% that indicated that was their threshold. After that, there's a big drop in support, and of course, the lower you go, the more you get increased support. And so, I think that's a good reminder, and you raised a good point as we're talking about our assumption for grants. Maybe what you want to consider is a grant assumption that brings you into the sweet spot, while also knowing that there's only so far we can go and scale back, and at some point we can't scale back far enough to just simply not build. But that is probably the area we want to spend the most time talking about, because if we are aiming to proceed to a referendum, I believe, and I'm making an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption from a staff perspective is that we'd be aiming to bring forward a referendum question that we feel has the highest likelihood of success. We wouldn't want to be going forward with something we think is automatically going to fail.
Perry, sorry, just as a follow-up to the question that I had. So for example, if Cherry Creek all of a sudden 1 year did a big subdivision, so then increases the number of households and population. So theoretically, the next year, then their tax rates would go down, correct?
Theoretically, all the tax rates in the region would go down, and Cherry Creek would actually look like they're taking more of the share of the pie, because their like percentage that they would be allocated would be more, even though their taxes could go down. I'm just going to go back up to that first option. So in that converted land and improvements as a percentage column, like Cherry Creek right now is 9%. So if they were to have significant development in their area and they boosted up and now they're 12% of the overall pie, I keep using the word pie, and Douglas Holmes would be not happy with me because he doesn't like that term. But they would take more of the pie, but that doesn't necessarily mean their households would be paying more because they have more on the roll. But yes, it is looked at every year. There is a bit of a lag for new construction based on the timing of BC assessment and when they look at things and when they're valued. But yes.
Director Roth.
Thank you. I looked and considered my own property, and it's about 1,000 square foot house with a shop on 5 acres. And my tax increase would be between $800 and $900 per year. I think a referendum would fail, honestly, because 1,000 square foot house, I mean, the value is the land. And just because you have land doesn't mean you have money. So I do agree that we need to be looking at grants, because this will fail. Thank you.
Director Boyko.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just looking at all the different options here, and they're all plus or minus a little bit. Some places get go up and down. One of the main concerns I have is on average, the regional areas are paying more than the city on average per property. We talked a couple meetings ago about the Beaufort people and the farmers having multiple parcels of land, and we're going to look into how many farms have multiple parcels of land that produce our food. And then if we do option 4, how much they would go up. And some of them have expressed a lot of concern about that. And finally, in Beaufort, we don't have services. We don't want services or anything. And our total tax requisition is about $190,000 to $200,000 per year. This pool, in every aspect of it, would basically double the taxes that the Beaufort people pay. Just straight off the bat, double it, plus or minus like 5%. So without any grants, having the Beaufort people double their taxes for one item is very questionable. So we have to look at that a little bit further. Thank you.
Any other? Go ahead, Terry.
Just that, yes, the only way to reduce these costs is to increase our grant reliance. So if like all of these options are just shuffling the total amount. So the only way to actually, if you're feeling like these numbers are all too high, then the only way to do that is either A, scale down the facility and just actually start talking about what you want included in the facility or not include in the facility, or increase a reliance on grant funding. Those are like otherwise we're really just shifting who do we want to be paying it. None of them are reducing that amount. So.
Director Sparrow?
Well, thank you. So, if I go back to option 2 and we do a 25% grant funding, that should bring the high number down in the high 400s, 450 to 490 range, roughly. It should be in the sweet spot. Is that?
I don't want to guess off the top of my head, to be honest. And I was going to start calculating out all the options, but I had so many spreadsheets going for you guys that I just felt like if I gave you more, we were going to be into an abyss of spreadsheets. So I think that if you want to make a recommendation and ask staff to come back with spreadsheets on the 25%, it'd be super helpful from a staff perspective if we could eliminate a couple of these options and maybe we come back with 3 options with grant funding, but the more we can start weeding out, I'm definitely happy to bring back more information, but I don't want to guess off the top of my head.
Director Roth?
Thank you. What's the highest amount of grant funding that we may be eligible for? Like as far as percentage?
So we are just about to face a provincial and federal election. So I don't even want to guess on that. I will say that recreational facilities at this point are not the top priority of either government. Not saying they're not out there. But really they're looking at like your water and environmental components first. I definitely think that we are looking to partner with Shashat and Hupachesa and the nations at our board table, and they have access to different pots of funding that we have access to, but I wouldn't even want to speculate. I think if we went over 30%, then we're really at risk at not getting it, because I think at that point we're going to be stacking multiple things. The reality of getting like a 90% grant, I don't personally think is there. But again, these programs change every time they're delivered. So it's really hard to guess.
Yeah. In 2018, there was a recreational infrastructure funding for these kinds of things. But at first, if you got in right off the get-go, you're able to get up to 50% funding, if I remember correctly. But it became so oversubscribed because every community across Canada needs new recreational facilities. So then the maximum amount you're able to get went down. So it's fortunately we don't have a crystal ball, even if anything's going to be available. Director Boyko.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just looking at the total here. Total estimated annual cost is 7.6 million. So that is just to service the debt with 0% grant funding and the operating costs. So that is actually not paying off the actual borrowing itself. So that's just paying it's like you bought a house, you're just paying the interest, not the principal. Is that correct? And I got to follow up after that.
Nope, that's both. That's the annual borrowing cost. So the way the MFA does it is we pay a principal payment once a year and interest twice a year. So that is the borrowing cost of both paying down the principal amount and the interest component of it.
Okay, good. So that's 5.6 of basically paying your mortgage, interest, and principal over 30 years plus $2 million. Have we added any inflation into the cost of actually operating it, or just assuming 1.8 to 2.2 per year?
No, I just went with the 2 million, and then we would have to deal with that component of it over time.
Okay, so just so everyone knows, the tax requisition for the ACRD total last year was 8.8 million. And we're looking at almost doubling that just for this on tax if we get zero grant funding. So our tax burden to the people is basically 90%, 190% more than what they're doing. So 8.8 plus 7.6, whatever that works out to, 16 million. So that's basically doubling the tax requisition right there. So if we get 0% grant funding, that's what we're looking at. Thank you.
Just to go back to the grant funding, when the multiplex was built, the community really came together and donated a lot of in-kind services to help bring that cost down. So I would like that if this goes through, we have to develop some kind of champion committee. And we did talk about that before, to really go out to the community and say, what can you contribute? You know, can it be a backhoe? Can it be somebody in charge of the site or leveling the site? All those kinds of things really will go a long ways to bringing this number down. And I don't know how much in-kind services the multiplex got, but they got a lot of community and support through that. So we'd have to go that route again. Did you want to say something, Daniel? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Director Cote.
Thank you. So looking at the cost here, also, there is no land cost included in that either. So that would be another expense.
Would that be another expense? So I'm just going back up to my cost allocation. So there's a lot of assumptions in here, and we don't really have a full design out, but if we're not going to proceed, there's no point in kind of firming up these numbers as well. So I feel like the 100 million could get us there, and that in my mind, the land component could be put into that contingency, but we haven't started that location discussion. We have a meeting set up for next week or the following week with city staff to start discussing location. And if we pick somewhere super obscure and out of the way and requires land clearing or a whole bunch of extra stuff, then obviously that's going to be higher. So possibly not, but I do feel like I've picked a number because we can't go over it. So I've picked a number that I feel like we can be within, but there is definitely more factors to come. Yes.
Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's 14 items that are not included in the estimate that's there right now, including GST, land, development cost charges, demolition, and it just goes on and on. There's total of 14 things. One other thing I'd like to revisit is it has been suggested that we could renovate the current pool. So if we're all coming together and make a new one, and it's going to cost double the tax burden on basically the people of the valley, why can we not look at doing a renovation to the current pool? So there's a report done in 2011 that has some detail in what's wrong with the pool, that has basically one sentence says it's old and leaks a bit, and that's about it. I would like to make a motion to get the members of the board to have a visit of the current pool in detail of the mechanical systems and tell exactly what's wrong. So instead of only assuming we can spend $100 million on a new pool and double the tax requisition of the valley for the ACRD budget, look at what other options are realistically on the table. if we got to shut down the current pool for a year or 6 months, we already shut it down for 1 month a year. Plus, with the reduced staffing levels, we're missing a whole bunch of, how do you want to say, sewing lessons and everything else going on. So I would like to be able to take the staff and the members of the board that are voting on this to the current pool, get a realistic tour for an hour or two, look at mechanical systems, look at everything, tell us exactly what's wrong, more than just the one paragraph in the 2011 report. Thank you.
Director Roth?
I would like to second Director Boyko's motion.
Thank you. If I remember correctly, it has been a while since I've read that report, but the 2011 report, it was the cost of 18 million to renovate the pool and 23 million to build a new pool. So in 2011 numbers, there wasn't a lot of difference between having a new pool and renovating an old pool. And at the end of the day, you still have an old pool. But of course, that was 2011 numbers. So I don't know what those numbers would be today. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Director Beckett.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing for clarification is that Director Boyko, I wouldn't exclude those that are non-voting. I think that I have an interest in the pool, and it's the services that provides the community and region. And I would leave it as an option for those that aren't voting. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
I would say more the merrier, Director Beckett. Come on out, and you have a valuable opinion on what water systems are and pumps and pipes. And we can actually see in detail with staff what is wrong. Thank you.
Director Roth.
Perhaps we could even invite an engineer along. Oh, wait a minute. We do have one. Sorry, thanks.
Director Minions.
Thank you. I'm not opposed to a tour of the pool. I think that we should do all that we can to make sure we are putting forward the best options for the community. I know that there is a lot of concern around the cost. I think we should also continue the conversations that we're having today. I think ultimately, like, it might be a more complicated conversation, but if the Valley decides that we're going to renovate the pool, I think the operation model and the ownership or cost of paying for that still changes. So all the conversations that we're having today are still relevant to determine how we would pay for a large scale renovation that probably wouldn't be 18 million since that was from 2011. But so I think that good work has been done here today. We may not be getting to the point yet of being able to put a number in front of the community. I'm totally comfortable if we feel there's more due diligence to be done and going and looking at the pool. I also think it's super important to recognize that whether we're engineers or not, we are absolutely not experts on this specifically. We have experts who are working on this and providing us information. And I think that we should trust them, but that doesn't mean we should skip steps. So going and look so that we can all be better informed, I think is a great option. But just with the understanding that, the city of Port Alberni on our own we are not pursuing doing a major renovation on the pool. So the conversations we're having today are still relevant. Thanks.
I would be in support of doing a tour. I'm not against that, but we would need somebody to go in to give us the hard numbers, how much it would cost for renovation, because there isn't one person here that would be qualified to do that. So that would be additional cost that the board would have to take on is the cost of a consultant to give us those hard numbers. Director Boyko.
Thank you very much. There are people in this room talking that are qualified to do this. That being said, I think having a tour would be great. We don't need to get a cost estimate before we have a tour. We can have a tour and talk with the people that actually run it, the maintenance staff, that kind of thing, to say, hey, this pump's 95 years old. This pump's, we changed it last week. This is what we did in September this year to fix it. This is our leak rate. This is how much we're spending on things like that. Realistic numbers rather than just the one paragraph in the 2011 report. Thank you.
Again, we don't have qualified people to give us hard numbers to do renovations on a pool. So I'm support of doing the tour, but I'm not in support of anyone on this board giving us the numbers. I would want to get a consult to do that, an expert in the industry. Okay, we have any other questions or comments before I call for the motion? Heather's going to read out the motion.
That the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee recommend to the board to schedule a Board of Directors tour of the Echo Aquatics facility.
Any final questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Did you get it? Was that carried then? Okay, motion carried. Sorry, I can't see everybody. Director Cote.
Thank you. I have another question. Is there any reserve built into this budget for future pool maintenance and because this loan is for 30 years? Like, what is the lifespan of this new pool? And would we be putting money away for another new pool at the same time? Because we do asset management. Thank you.
I don't know what they have built into that $2 million estimate. That would have to be a question for the consultants as to where they've come up with that. And as we got closer, we would end up refining that a bit more. Personally, I feel like it becomes double taxation if you are saving up for the replacement of a pool and borrowing for an existing pool. However, at the end of the 30 years, I would be recommending that 7.6 or 5.6 million that's been going to the debt servicing costs would then start to build the reserve for the next pool and not drop off the tax requisition at that point. So there would need to be more details, but I know that when we had built the survey question, there was a capital replacement factor of, I think, 20% built into it. So I'm thinking that might be included in that 2 million. But again, we really need to define what that pool looks like before they can give us some accurate operating costs.
Thank you, Director Jack.
Yeah, just procedurally, as next time we do a vote, if you can't see things, just ask them to stop sharing the screen. It'll make it a lot easier. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of the items that says we should have a new pool is pools only last 30 years. So Director Cote's comment of should we start saving up for the new one? If we're going to be paying this off for 30 years and then immediately saying that this thing is 30 years old and no longer useful, start building a new one, we're going to be perpetually paying for a new pool forever based on the 30-year lifespan of a pool. I do have one other question though. Our contingency went up dramatically from the estimate in February until this estimate. Is there a reason for that? Thank you.
The contingency.
It went up to 25%. It was like 15 before.
Yeah, so a Class D estimate by definition, I believe, is plus or minus 40%. I think when they used it in theirs, they did talk about plus or minus 25, but then they did really emphasize the inflation factor. So we can lower it, but then it just gives us more restriction moving forward. And with the way that things are moving, and I wouldn't recommend that at this time.
Go ahead, Daniel.
So the difference in the numbers is the inflation. So what we're looking at is the time of construction. They had forecasted what would occur if we, if and when we build. And so in terms of looking at the inflation costs, those were added in that weren't in the original number. So the original number that we discussed was the today costs. And what we're talking about is if we build in 2027. I think that is the most significant change that you're seeing there.
Director Cote.
Thank you. It's going to be an interesting budget year. I'm just wondering what other significant costs we're facing right now for the next couple of years. I know that we were looking at a new office building. I know that there's infrastructure for water that's being contemplated. And I'm just wondering how those costs will factor in with a budget when we're looking at a new pool. And when would we start paying? Would it be right away? Would we start taxing this coming year in 2025 for a new pool? So that we start because we would know some of the costs? Or would we wait till 2026 or 2027? Where does that fall into place? Thank you.
In terms of upcoming costs, definitely like Bamfield's about to go to a sewer referendum here in a couple of weeks, I guess, at this point. There is a feasibility study out for a discussion regarding the future of this building. I'm trying to think what else is in the strategic plan. The solid waste management plan could definitely have some financial implications moving forward. There's lots of moving pieces and lots of components in that strategic plan that are definitely with costs for sure. It will be a prioritization exercise as it is every year as to where we want to head. Your other question is escaping me now. Oh, when do we start paying? So we would definitely need to requisition some money next year for the referendum if we're going to proceed to a referendum. Then we would start requisitioning some money. We wouldn't be jumping to the 7.6 million by any means, but we would need money for, depending on the grant funding, for seeking grant funding. We're going to need to get a project manager in place to lead this project. There'll be significant discussions about what the operations of the service looks like. So we would be taxing, we don't have an ability to tax until we complete a successful referendum, besides the cost of the referendum itself. And then at that point, we would have to determine what our project plan is. But again, that would depend on what's your reliance on grant funding. Are we proceeding without it? Then if so, then we'd probably start taxing right away.
Thank you. So the referendum would be to create the service?
Yes, we must do a referendum to create the service. It would be a referendum in each area. So it would be like each electoral area and the city of Port Alberni and New Checklist would all have polling stations.
So is that two referendums then? One to create the service and one to do the borrowing?
One referendum that has a two-part question. Do you want to create the service? And do you authorize the borrowing to a maximum of, as one question?
Director Roth?
Thank you. Director Cote raised really good points. For Beaver Creek, we're looking at finding new source water and potentially adding advanced water treatment onto our water system. And that definitely would be a priority over a new aquatic center. Thank you.
So Terry, how do you want us to proceed? You want us to start taking out a couple of options and then have you come back? Is that how you want us to proceed?
If you're willing to take, if there's options that you know you don't want to proceed with, that's great. If we're putting this entire project on pause to explore renovating the other facility, then I would say we don't need to do anything at this time. We can just bring it back when you're done that tour and determine if you even want to proceed up to the directors.
What is the wish of the board? Director Cote and then Director Sparrow.
Thank you. I think we have direction to go and look at the old pool. I think that we need to rule that out if that's the case at this point, because if there's any question, and I have heard it from the community, why aren't we looking at the old pool and renovating? Getting those numbers again would be, I think, important so that we can, in all good faith, say that this is not recommended. Or it is recommended that we take another look at that. So it does give us another option at this point. My husband actually does the testing of the actual pool and give it a clean bill of health again. Not saying that the pipes or anything, any other part of the pool is not good, and I don't know how long that would last for. But yeah, they do an assessment. The city does do an assessment on the pool. So it'd be nice to know what that is, what their expectancy of the pool is. Maybe that's something that we should be contemplating as to maybe this pool has another 10 years of life or 5 years of life. That's when we should be starting to save money and looking for grants and putting it to that point. I know that the costs always escalate, but it might be another option. Thanks.
The pool is well past its life expectancy. Director Sparrow.
Thank you for that. And yes, the turn the pool would be great, see what's going on, but the same token, if we can knock these numbers down, say one or two choices, well, obviously, and then see what we, with 25% grant funding, so the numbers, we have static numbers right now, and then grant funding numbers later on, we'll have a better idea of where we're heading. So we're actually doing two avenues at once. We're going to look at the old pool, but at the same time, we're looking at what we can do to move forward on this pool. I think that's the best way I think we should go.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think having having a tour of the existing facility would be great because fundamentally the design of the potential pool is almost the same as what we currently got. A 6-lane, 25-meter pool, hot tub, small pool, hot area. We don't have the wave pool, we don't have the beach entry, we don't have the little lap pool, but fundamentally it's the same size for the same size population. If we can do this and make it visible to the public that we're looking at this seriously instead of just saying it's old. And I know these discussions are taking place this year at the Port Alberni City Council as well, that the public is balking at spending $100 million on a new facility that is essentially the same size as what we currently have. I think we should have a good look, set it up for the next couple of weeks, put some time into it, and everybody come there, put on your coveralls, and let's get dirty. Thank you.
Okay, so does someone want to make a motion to put this on pause, or what would you like us to do, Terry?
If you guys are content to remove a couple of these options, then we could keep going with this process because again, I guess Director Minions is right. Like the current pool is under City of Port Alberni governance. And even if we were to renovate it, if it were to become a service of the ACRD, we still need to go through these apportionment discussions and finish that. So even if you're not wanting to make a motion on the grant percentage, because you're not sure if you're renovating versus new, if you have any apportionment options that you're willing to remove at this time, I have a couple of notes of what you're wanting further information brought forward on, then that would be helpful.
Thank you, Director Jack.
I was just going to suggest that we could eliminate parcel tax. I think that's something that I think population is going to have to be considered in some way. I just don't know what the mix would be if we move ahead with it. So while we should contemplate looking at the things, it's from it as an exercise of if we go ahead with it, can we think on what the values are moving forward on making it happen if it does go ahead? And I just don't see parcel tax working. So I don't know if we have to have motions to eliminate something, or do we have a motion to go with one or two of them? I would take suggestions from others. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Sorry, I left my hand up, but I kind of agree. I would say get rid of option 4 and potentially option 1 as well. And then you got 3 options left that we can have serious discussions in the future about.
I would second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to remove option 1 and option 4. Any other questions or comments? Director Cote.
Thank you. I'm against that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before I call Director Roth?
Could we have a recorded vote, please?
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to take out option 1 and option 4 and ask for a recorded vote. Option 1 and option 4. Director Beckett?
Thank you. As I sit around the table, I always try to understand my colleagues' perspective, and I'm wondering if I could appeal to Director Cote to explain why she's not in favor of it. That would be helpful for me if she doesn't mind. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Director Cote.
Thank you. I'm against that because I want that number to remain there because it's a constant number that everybody pays the same. And even if it's just for reference going forward, I want to be able to see that. Because when I do look at the roll tax, the percentage, and I will be doing that for my area, and I can look back and see what the parcel tax would have been.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and this is going to be recorded vote. So when you want to call the question, can you please keep your hands raised till I call your name? All in favor of the motion? Director Sparrow, Director Jett, Director Boyko, Director Roth, Director Minions, Director Beckett, Director Coots, and Director Haggard. All opposed to the motion? Director Cote. Motion is passed. So does that help you, Terry? You've taken out those two options?
Yes, so the other component would be, do you want to specify a grant amount, or because the total amount might be less due to a new facility, do we want to just leave that for now would be the other component?
Thank you, Director Boyko.
I would say we leave that off. Basically until we get some new governments in place and see what their directions are, which one will happen in the next month, one might happen in the next 2 months. Who knows what's going to happen there? That being said, let's examine the current facility in detail, put our heads together on that. If we need to change the level of service to make that renovation work, I'm sure we can have some serious discussions about that in the future. I don't agree with the fact that we're limited to 0, 25, and 50%. But I would like to re-examine those numbers when we see what new governments are in place and what's actually happening with grants in the future. If all recreation facilities are shut down, basically as what happened with Campbell River, where they got 0% grants, then we need to have a serious look at whether we're going to put that tax burden on the people. Thank you.
Go ahead, Terry.
Sorry, I should have mentioned those were just, it can be anywhere between 0 and 100% for grant reliance. I just gave them as some earmarks for you.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is just leave it for now. Is that okay with the board? Director Sparrow.
Thank you. I say leave it for now, but could we get a chart saying what would it cost for 25% grant funding, so we know it won't be 25% of the cost we see. It'll be like 15% of the cost that we see, so we have an idea how that would look per household going forward. That's possible. Do you need a motion for that, or? Okay, thank you.
Did you have another comment, Director Boyko, or did you forget to lower your hand? Thank you. Okay, so Terry, you've got direction now on a couple of things. Okay, perfect. Okay, so unless there's any other final questions or comments, we'll move on to reports. Director Cote?
So a question, because this has to go to referendum to each area. Because I'm having difficulty with the assessment-based taxation. There's been a motion that's been approved by the board. If my community does, because I will be talking to them about this in the near future, if they don't want to go ahead with assessment base, that would remove us from this whole process, which I'm afraid of, because I want to make sure that it gets to go to the people so that they have their say. So I'm just wondering how we're moving forward with this. Thanks.
The board needs to agree on a method to bring to referendum. So then your area could then vote it down if they don't support the model. But if we don't come to an agreement at the table about what that formula is, then there's a very good chance that it never makes it to referendum. So we have to finish defining what the service is in order to bring it there. So, and at some point it maybe doesn't go to referendum, or it does go to referendum and then through the voting process, because it's by each area and not a 50+1 for the entire service area, then if one area were to fail it, then the entire referendum is failed, and then we would go back to the drawing board again.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk to you about the roll number, like the percentage, going forward, so that I have that information to provide to the community members that are saying now that the parcel tax is the way they'd like to go. So I need to have some numbers that would satisfy that I can explain this to them going forward. That's why I'm voting against it, because I know what the constant number is in a parcel tax. So, but I don't know what it is going forward. And I don't know that it would be supported. And that's what the whole objective is of this exercise, is to make sure that we can bring forward a pool. Everybody wants one, but it's how are we going to get there? Thanks.
Would it be better then to wait till we actually decide and then you can get those numbers for a penny? Because we don't want you to do a bunch of work.
Yeah,
Because
no,
that was
I
the
think-
option.
I think it's fine. I can definitely provide Director Cote with some stuff now. I think that this is a very challenging decision to make, and it's the first time we've kind of moved from to this regional model. And I think that once we decide what model and apportionment we are going to choose, I think we are going to have to do some news releases and some information packages and stuff even before we get to that full referendum stage, so that people can understand the dynamics of how it all worked and what was decided. So we definitely recognize that this is not something that the average member of the public lives in every day, and it's a very complicated subject matter that we do need to make sure is understandable for them as they are leading up to making those decisions, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so did you have a final comment?
Just that $7.6 million is a lot of money. It's almost like buying an airport expansion every year. So that's.
Yeah, if we want to go in the aquatics world, that's what we're facing. That's why it's a tough decision. And that's why also I think there is a reality where we decide we're not bringing it to the public. And we just decided it can't fit at this time because of all the other priorities. Absolutely. But that's up for the directors to decide how that's going to work.
Okay, so unless there's any final questions or comments, we'll move on. Seeing none, we'll go to reports. Update on the Sort and Go Education Program report and presentation. Paula, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. As you have before you, we've got a report for information to give a brief update on the Sort and Go Waste Education Program that we've been conducting over the last year. As you may know, we've through the board, we've contracted with Let's Talk Trash, waste education specialists, to assist us with a lot of the messaging work, tabling, working with community champions and whatnot. I do have a brief PowerPoint presentation, so if the board will permit, I will go through that, and then we can open it up for questions at the end. And with that, I'll do a quick share. And there. All right. Can everybody see the title screen there?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. So opening up, as mentioned, we are going to go through a brief overview of the Sort and Go Education Program. That's everything having to do with whether you're talking curbside schedules, whether you're sorting materials, trying to figure out where to take materials to, all those sorts of things. Everything is lumped into this process here. So I'll take us through this next brief piece of our overview. We'll start with the onboarding piece. We contracted with Let's Talk Trash earlier this year, a very dedicated waste education group to assist us with building out capacity to provide outreach. And with onboarding them earlier in the year, we introduced them to a lot of the folks that are working on our facilities and our operations with our various contractors. So through this, we took them through the West Coast Organics facility. We've introduced them to our contractors here in the Alberni Valley, out in Bamfield as well, working with the folks at the Earthland and Sea Organics facility, as well as the makerspace and local reuse store that we have here in town. So get them to get a good boots on the ground feel for what we have out in the world here. Just advance this. Thank you. Going through the piece with our schools, we worked with the AV and West Coast School with Let's Talk Trash and worked to develop a series of school contacts and resources to help promote a lot of the waste education reduction work we do with the curriculum. School-wide campaigns and field trips were launched, as well as a virtual presentation that was done during Pro D Day. There was a lot of work as well with the West Coast side, identifying West Coast organics potential haulers. We also provided through them eco resources and hosted special guest presenters, such as, for example, we've noted the water rangers that include a piece on waste getting into lakes and waterways, those kinds of things there. The other programs that we've looked at are working with our Recycle BC program, working with our contractors that are on the curbside piece, and also promoting the branding for Sort and Go. So it's been a really good system so far, and yeah, more to come. Here, as far as the community awareness is concerned, we've put together some samples of what we put out in the world here, created draft documents for themes of the year, whether you were talking about, wish cycling, whether you're talking about fall, different materials go, securing your carts. We've got some samples of some of the social media and brochure pieces that we've included here, talking about what happens to my recycling, what happens with electronics, talking about a little bit about the ocean plastics depot and the recycling work out there, which diverts rope and netting materials and reverts it into feedstock for other materials as well, whether you're upcycling, as we show the artist located here, or you're looking at material that are going to be renovated into park benches and things like that. So really good push on reuse and bringing that information out there. Another piece that we've been working through, a little bit more specific with West Coast, and that's working on vacation rental toolkits, involving a lot of the folks that are coming into the area, whether they're doing Airbnbs, to understand how to use the Sort and Go app, where to get the information, and where to dispose and divert of various materials that they use as they come into our area. Next slide. One of the biggest successes we've had is onboarding with community champions. So we work with Let's Talk Trash to help us oversee the messaging and bring information out there. The biggest thing too is also boots on the ground, and where that comes into play is recruiting local community champions in the Alberni Valley and the West Coast. We have 3 in the area, 1 here and 2 in the West Coast, and we've been able to incorporate their work with overview of Recycle BC materials, talking about what is contamination, things that are allowed in curbside, where materials go, and how to use the Sort and Go app. The biggest showcase that we have are obviously at a lot of the Port Day, World's Ocean Day, the fall fair that we just had recently, where we saw upwards of 260 people visit our tent. And talking through utilizing the Sort and Go game and getting, honestly, the kids involved with the game, which also starts the conversation with folks asking those same sorts of questions. How do I and where do I take care of my different waste materials? We also had a couple of outreach pieces, whether we worked with the Transition Town folks in the Alberni Valley, or we did movie night in the Tofino Legion a while back. Yeah, so those are the kind of the brief sessions that we've had. I'll move forward. One of the campaigns we had, and that's again focused with tourists, is sort like a local. And so you'll see, this piece here talking about green waste, blue waste, and sorting out at the recycling depot. We're really pushing hard to utilize the waste app, because there are hundreds and hundreds of items that can be disposed of in certain areas. We're aiming for having more robust eco depots to take more and more materials, but as we do that, we continually update the app, and Sort and Go has been great with assisting us with doing the graphic treatments and providing this information that we can put out to the folks. And finally, a little bit on communications. This is one of the samples for the new Sort and Grow compost product that we have out on the West Coast facility side. But essentially what we've been working with is continuing weekly agendas through the solid waste team. They've been working with Let's Talk Trash and doing regular check-ins on what we're hearing for social media posts, updating those materials, talking about contamination, talking about ways to reduce, doing the presentation with the ACRD Solid Waste Management Plan Advisory Committee earlier in the year, working with our West Coast Solid Waste Group, and preparing the third and fourth quarter overview of the work plan. Now they've gotten some familiarity, providing some of those recommendations on where they see that we could get the most bang for our buck. We've talked about a little bit about curbside software participation, again, more specific to the West Coast, and then continuing to assess through meetings, assessing effectiveness of our educational outreach. One key piece that we had that I'll flag is there's definitely an opportunity to include more video content for targeted education, like short reels that would resonate with local communities. So something that we're looking at and we're really excited to explore here. And that is it for the slideshow. Again, very brief, but I will stop that there and bear with me. And I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Paula.
Okay, there we
Glad
go.
to see that you're moving into the schools, because it's our children and grandchildren that holds us accountable in case we do throw something in the garbage that should be recycled. I do get in trouble and reminded every time I make a mistake when my grandchildren are staying with me, so thank you. Director Boyko.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When the survey first came out, it did have registration that people had to register, and we are trying to increase public engagement, not decrease it. So thank you for getting that removed, staff. That being said, item 5 is one of the suggestions. I'm just going to read it off here, is established multi-stream diversion programs. And one sentence here is the problematic one for the rural communities, and I'll explain why. It is reinforced with mandatory source separation requirements. So we looked at this 2 years ago in 2022, and very similar strategy was involved of mandatory source separation requirements and forcing people to use this at their house. And 1,200 people responded, much higher percentage wise than the last aquatic survey. So this is people actually get their feelings right into the garbage and recycling and being told how to do it. But Beaufort Area B, 81% opposed. Sprout Lake, 84.2% opposed. Area E, Beaver Creek, 82.1% opposed. Cherry Creek, Area F, 68.7% opposed. So we looked at this 2 years ago. What's different now than what we're doing 2 years ago, and got everyone all up in arms? And our questions we're already being asked is, why are we wasting our time looking at this when we've already shown we don't want to do this particular part of it? Can we focus in other areas? And also, 60% of the waste diversion does not come from residential. It comes from industry, hotels, restaurants, commercial, that kind of thing. If we're trying to get the most bang for our buck, like you just said, Paul, why are we not focusing our efforts there instead of on the people? Thank you.
Please go ahead, Paula.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Director Boyko. Thank you for those questions. And then we can focus on the solid waste management plan for a moment. Yeah, the strategies, you're asking why they're different. The key piece, pardon me. Your key piece that you were asking about, why is it different? The focus is, I'm sorry, the mic is cutting out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry about that, folks. Appreciate that. Anyway, what's different now is the focus is, again, focusing on waste diversion and looking at those gaps that we have in the rural areas, in the communities. There's still 20%, as we know, where there are no access to services. So what is different now? We're going out with proposed strategies, again, proposed strategies to manage different waste streams. You're absolutely correct that the commercial industry, the ICI area, there's definitely a larger percentage piece. But with the process that we have, we do need to ask the question for everybody: what is going to work as far as solutions for community, for your specific community, to divert waste? And it could be any number of possibilities, but we're looking for that collective wisdom out there from the folks to bring that feedback in. That's what we're asking about. So again, that's why we have these proposed strategies. There's no specific strategy that has been decided on to say, this is it and the decision's been completed. That's not the case. I wanted to make that very clear. And I'm blanking. I think you had another question from me and I missed it.
I think my main question is the mandatory source separation. So we've already got feedback 2 years ago, but we're proposing the same thing of mandatory source separation at the people. So you mentioned that we have a 20% gap where we're not having that. Are you saying that the rural areas represent 20% of the valley, and because we do not have control of how people do their garbage, whether they use it, whether they compost on their own land or whether they use a private contractor, then that's a problem and we need to take care of it? Is that what's being said?
That is, thank you, Director. That is one of the many things that we're looking at. Again, like 20% covers the single family homes. That is everybody that is out there that is left over that does not have access, including the rural areas. With the, okay.
So I think the assumption that because the ACRD is not telling people what to do in the rural areas with their land and single family homes is a mistake. People have been living out here for over 100 years and have developed ways to manage their waste, do the composting themselves, share it with their friends. I mean, I got vegetables from my neighbors this morning that had too many, so instead of letting them go to waste, we share them around. And we all have either ways of using a private contractor for garbage or taking it to the landfill themselves and reducing it. So I think the assumption fundamentally is flawed that 20% of the valley is not responsible. Thank you.
Well, Daniel's going to help you out here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add it. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. So we're required to update our solid waste management plan. So we have to do that every 10 years per a directive from the province. And we need to be able to annually, as we know, we produce an annual report. We need to be able to report statistics to the province. And for that, we need to be able to collect data. The conversation we want to have with each one of the communities, which is why we've expanded all this, is that we do want to talk about, hey, our problem as ACRD staff is that we need to measure this and we need to close gaps. And we're taking that to the public because we're trying to develop a plan for the next decade that's going to say, what things should we focus on in your community that helps us solve our problem as well in terms of better reports. Now, it's okay to say, like, right now what we have is we have some recycling collection, and there's been a lot of debate around the compost, and that redirection of compost and what's in a garbage bag is something that's important to talk about. We're not pretending to come in and say, hey, we've got the exact solution. We know what solutions work elsewhere. We can talk about that. And we have also heard from the community that they do not want something like three stream. It doesn't prevent the fact that we want to work with the community, talk about what are those long-term solutions that can work for your community. And yes, we're aware that in other areas outside of the rural areas, multifamily doesn't have a solution right now, and we need to tackle that. ICI doesn't have a good solution, and we're going to tackle that. So we're not saying the problem is rural area. What we're saying is we need long-term strategies with the rural area. And if you leave it to staff, you know what the answer is, and 84% have already said, we don't like your answer. So what we're doing is saying, we hear you. What is the right answer for your community then that takes into account our requirement for long-term reporting and the realities of your day-to-day life? Because we can't pretend to know your day-to-day life. And this is what this whole engagement process is about. And it's not meant to be confrontational, but if we can't have good conversations with communities, how do we develop a plan together? It doesn't add up.
Thank you, Director Ross.
Thank you. People in my area think that the ACRD is heading towards a regional-wide plan and that we all have to have the same plan. So that's what they're getting out of it. They don't like the survey that's out there because of the way information was being collected. It's been changed since then, but that was an immediate response. And for my area, I mean, we have everything that Beaufort has, and on top of it, we have recycling pickup. So it seems like Director Boyko said, we're having the same conversation we had 2 years ago, and it's really hard for the people to understand anything other than they're just looking at a different way, or the ACRD is looking at a different way at forcing more taxation on the people. Thank you.
I think we have to understand as well that regulations from provincial and federal governments are always changing, and we have to keep up with those changes as well. Dr. Jack?
Yeah, I was just going to say, having the same plan doesn't necessarily mean we'll be doing the same thing from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of the EAs. I think it's important for people in Beaver Creek to know that they were able to get a grandfathered recycling system in, and that's not the case. That's not possible for other electoral area directors or electoral areas without going three stream. So that's always going to be a part of the conversation. We're not going to avoid saying the words just because people didn't vote for it. But at the same time, we do need to find ways to measure how this all works so that we can make progress. The other thing that we need, though, is maybe a conversation around freeing up resources so that we can pursue some sort of ICI multifamily unit and construction strategy, because the way that these things are calculated end up affecting the overall average. But if we're to make our targets without addressing ICI and C&D for sure, then it's going to be extremely difficult. And right now, there isn't the same sort of groundwork that's been laid in order for us to do that with the province. So we'll know more after the election, see whether or not there's actionable work that we can do there. But we can bring the average down if we can actually get ICIs, so institutions, commercial, industrial, to reduce their own waste. But once again, it becomes an issue of how do we measure that? And so measuring for other areas outside of maybe Beaver Creek, because you have your own system, might be more difficult. It just needs to be scientific. I would love to be able to measure these things so that we can address it early. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Director Ross.
I'm just wondering if perhaps the education that Paulo's talking about, if it includes enough for industry. It seems more geared towards young people and residents when 60% of the garbage is industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyko.
Yes, I agree with that last comment. We need to look at multi-residential that we do not have a solution for, because if we're trying to reduce things by leaps and bounds to get to 350 kilograms in 10 years, which I still don't agree with, because that is not the mandate from the BC government exactly. It's not to do within 10 years, but it's to do it at some point in the future, and that might change in 2 weeks when we get a new government. So spending a lot of taxpayer money now when it's not required, I don't know, is always the best thing to do. But when we talk about data, every time I go to the Sort and Go Center in Port Alberni, they ask me where I come from, and I say I come from Beaufort, and they record stuff. Is that data not actually being used for anything, or are they calculating it and not passing it on to staff that can be used in a reasonable manner to determine garbage? Thank you.
A good question. Do you have a response for that, Paulo?
Thank you, Chair. All good questions. Yes, we do record the origin point when you come in to declare your garbage, like where you're coming from, and your recyclables as well. So we do log that into our landfill software, and that captures that material, and then that winds up going into its appropriate bin. What we're still need to get, and it gets back to something that Director Jack said earlier, is getting an ability to measure that material per area. In other words, you're looking at, realistically auditing those different types of pieces. And that's where we look at and ask those questions of how we can measure those materials from the different areas. Right now, if you bring in materials such as what you've described, Director Boyko, it'll wind up going into the transfer station area. If it's garbage, it'll go up into the bin, and it gets mixed in with everything else, and it goes up to the landfill site. We do get the weights that come off of each individual area there, but that's about as granular as it gets. So we do need to work on getting more of that data to help inform folks on where we can where we can measure that progress. Yeah, that's something that I wanted to raise there.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Chair, in the last 2 years that I've been doing the director thing, maybe 2.5, I've seen 2 studies come out of the landfill where they broke down in granularity by a regional area where stuff had come from. Are we looking to redo that data to get more every year? Or, because I think we spent about $89,000 on those reports, and it was a company that came from somewhere else to do it and go through the garbage by area. Is that the kind of granularity we're looking at? Because don't we already have that recently in the past 2 years? Should we be redoing that every 5 years to see how we're doing, if we're improving? Like, is that what we're actually looking at? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Boyko. We'd be looking at something that gets a bit more granular than that. Similar sort of waste audit, but it focuses specifically on communities, all of the communities. And that's a piece that we weren't able to capture the last time. That's something that we'd be going for. So it's a little bit more granular than what you're describing at the landfill site at its hub. Right there, we just measure everything that comes in, and everything is isolated to its different percentages. But what we'd be looking at is what is coming from the individual areas, the actual communities out there, and audit those spaces. And then that's how we would look at trying to find a way to measure those specific community tonnages.
Any further questions or comments? Would someone like to make the motion that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee receives this report? Moved by Director Sparrow, second by Director Code. Any final questions or comments? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Motion carried. No late business question period. There's no one in the gallery. Any questions online, Heather?
Nothing in Zoom and nothing by email. Thank you.
Thank you. Good timing. Lunch is here. Give it a motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Sparrow, second by Director Cote. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you so much, everyone.
Enjoy your lunch. We'll see you guys in the afternoon. Bye.